Okay, the straw that really broke the camel's back was the election of Lincoln itself. This was, again, a declaration in the Southern mind on the part of the North that slavery is wrong and that slaveholders are evil. Now, we mentioned in our last talk that the slaveholders were very consciously building an aristocratic society. And in aristocratic society, honor is everything. And this was viewed by Southern states and by Southern leaders as an affront to Southern honor. The Mississippi resolutions on secession even explicitly use the word dishonor, that Lincoln is a sign that the North wants to dishonor and overthrow the South. So it was really the election of Lincoln that drove them over the edge. They lived with all of this other stuff, and now they've been formally repudiated, and they won't tolerate it anymore. And so they declare secession. Now, Lincoln is in a position where he has to respond to this argument that there is such a thing as secession, and that it is perfectly constitutional. And so Lincoln says, there are three ways to describe what the South is doing, and one of them is secession. But Lincoln argues in his first inaugural address in particular that there is no such thing as secession. And he says, there's no unilateral right for one party to withdraw from a contract. If all the states wanted to get together in a convention and abrogate the Constitution, then perhaps they could do that. But no one state could walk away from the contract any more than you or I could walk away from our mortgage unilaterally, or to alter the terms of it unilaterally. That, he says, is where the South crosses the line. Secession, moreover, is an appeal to the Constitution. This is important. Right? The Southerners claim that they have a legal right within the Constitution to withdraw from the Union. And Lincoln says, this is absurd. The only ways to change the system are constitutional amendment and revolution. If the founders had wanted to include secession as a mechanism for breaking up the country, they could have done that. They did already include one legal way to change the system from within the system, and that's the amendment process in Article 5. Now, what about the revolution question? The problem here is simply this, and we have to be clear here because seceding Southerners did tend to use that word and that language. And the Charleston Mercury, in the aftermath of South Carolina's ordinance of secession, declared that the tea has been thrown overboard, the Revolution of 1860 has begun. And Southerners tended to see themselves at various times as the heirs of Washington and Jefferson in defending their liberties in the way that the old revolutionaries did. But there's a problem here. Revolution, as it's understood in the American context, is an appeal to natural law. Only a long train of abuses, the Declaration says, of the inalienable natural rights of the people will justify revolution. But one must ask, at the end of the day, what right is it that the Southerners are seceding in order to protect? And it's simply this: the right to hold other human beings as chattel property. All other controversies have been susceptible of peaceful resolution except this one. But the basic problem lies in this. Under the theory of the American founding, contained in the Declaration of Independence and in a mountain of other documents, there can be no natural right to hold another human being as chattel property. It is prima facie a violation of the natural rights of the person held as a slave. So it can't be revolution, as America's founding fathers understood it. And so that, for Lincoln, means that what the South is up to can only be characterized as one way: insurrection, right? Armed rebellion, unlawful resistance to lawfully constituted authority. The South was perfectly happy to work within the constitutional system as long as they thought that they were getting their way. And now, for practically the first time since the adoption of the Constitution, something doesn't go their way. And in fact, between the adoption of the Constitution and the outbreak of the Civil War, the South wins every battle over slavery, or at least doesn't lose every battle over slavery until 1858. In 1858, they lost a battle over a pro-slavery constitution for Kansas. And then in 1860, they lost the election. Lincoln is elected president, and that puts them over the edge. Right? So that what's really going on here is that the South is saying people we disagree with won an election. And so therefore, even though we were perfectly happy with the system for decades before and insisted that everyone else live according to it, now that something didn't go our way, we are going to effectively take our ball and go home. They were perfectly content with the system until it produced a result they disliked. And so the practical import of what the South is doing in the Civil War is attempting to overturn a constitutional election by force. The South is looking at the North and saying, not my president. Resist. We are going to resist. And they do, with force. Now, Lincoln argues that the end result of this is either going to be anarchy or despotism. Either secession is a good principle for everyone so that any group can secede from any other group, or, and I think this is what Lincoln thinks the South really means to do, despotism, to impose minority rule on the country. We lost the election, but we are going to blow up the country unless you renounce the principles on which you were elected and submit yourselves to us once again. And Lincoln says we can't do that. If we do that, we are simply going to have to refight this battle at subsequent elections. What's really going on here, Lincoln says, and he says this in his special message to Congress when he called Congress into session on July 4th, 1861. He sent over a written message explaining what was going on in the country. And he says, the South seems to think, and he had said this in an earlier speech prior to his inaugural address, the South seems to think that the social compact created by the Constitution is a kind of free love arrangement that you can come and go from as you please. He says, no. Absent a long train of abuses, it is a permanent arrangement. If you lose an election, the remedy is not rebellion, but to win the next one. And that's what the South is up to here at the end of the day, rebellion, insurrection. Right? Lincoln described the doctrine of secession as sugar-coated rebellion. In other words, it was an elaborate fiction that was created by the slaveholding class to convince ordinary Southerners that one could be patriotic and rebellious at the same time, right? To justify legally what is simply insurrection. He says, at a deeper level, what's really at stake here is the survival of popular self-government. The South is an oligarchy. They want to be an aristocracy, but what they really are is an oligarchy, which is to say the rule of the few for their own good and not for the good of anybody else. An aristocracy is a society where the few rule, but they rule for the benefit of everyone. They're an explicit rejection of the founding, where the people rule for the good of all. The South is trying to impose oligarchy on the nation, but when they failed, and the election of Lincoln is the symbol that they had failed in their minds, they are trying to destroy what they could not control and to establish permanently a separate oligarchic nation in the South. And so Lincoln says, quote, this is a people's contest. He looks at the Southern Declaration of Rights and the Southern Constitution and says, where's the people? In the Southern Constitution, we the people is replaced with we the delegates of the sovereign and independent states. Where are the people? Why are we pushing the people out of view? And so Lincoln says, we are fighting. And this is a common theme among Republicans. We are fighting to vindicate republicanism, small r, against oligarchy in the nation. And one can see these themes carry